Story 1. Yes, at least most of the time. Power equals money. Stay in power to get more of it. Story 2. Laughing out loud. Look around. What problems are being solved? They do not give a flying fuck about their constituents. There are probably a few exceptions, but the majority want power. Story 3. They care about winning elections in order to stay in power, receive bribes, and avoid arrest for taking them. Story 4. Humans are not magically different now. American politicians face a horrific set of options that voters put them into without thoughtful consideration. Both parties require that virtually all waking hours be spent fundraising by essentially all elected officials, even if they are wealthy and their districts are secure, including down-ballot races. This problem existed before, but the Citizens United decision gave supremacy to the wealthiest lobbies and allowed unlimited soft money contributions, bribery, and coercion. It let lobbyists or dictatorial leaders fund and create opposition even within a candidate's party to force compliance, effectively creating a dictatorship of lobbyists and their wealthy backers. Whatever members of Congress care about, having those motivations dominate every waking hour will degrade the republic and likely destroy it. And here we are. Story 5. Of course they do. They do not give a fourth of a fuck about us. Story 6. Of course they need the job. Many modern politicians never had real jobs and could not do one if they tried. Story 7. Politicians have always responded immorally to the incentives they face. What has changed are the incentives themselves. They have long faced strong pressure to do what giant corporations and the ultra-wealthy want. They used to face more counter-pressure from, for example, strong labor unions, but now the incentives are almost entirely on the side of the rich and powerful. Story 8. I think this is true and is a flaw in democracy. It means long-term planning is quite difficult. That said, I do not know a good solution because while a dictatorship would not have this kind of problem, overall it is obviously much worse. Story 9. If you want to see something instructive, look at what politicians actually solve. That will indicate who is employing them. Business tax rates? Banking laws loosened? Interest rates cut? Story 10. I think modern politicians care about whatever their wealthy donors tell them. Story 11. When was the last time you saw politicians solve a problem? People solve problems. Politicians take credit for them. Story 12. I think they only care about winning because it lets them network more deeply with higher-ups who pay them to support certain laws or proposals and increases their visibility. Story 13. You see, it is the fault of democracy. If politicians did not have to worry about re-elections and campaigning, they would have more time to solve problems. So clearly, a dictatorship is the way forward. Story 14. I believe most of them value re-election more than any single cause. They justify this by fearing what their opponent might do rather than promoting what is best for the people. Story 15. If the situation were reversed, they would lose to those who care more about winning. Story 16. Absolutely. Why? Look around. What problems have you seen fixed in your lifetime? As others have said, it is all about money and power. If legislators in the United States were interested in fixing a problem, there would not be thousands, perhaps millions, of government workers going unpaid right now. Both sides have to win so they can use it to demonize the other side. I think we have had some presidents and perhaps a few legislators who tried to do positive things, but they were unable to get anything through because of the other side. That is what bothers me about people feeling so strongly about a president, whether the current one or a past one. They have to follow party lines to have a chance to get reelected, so they are not going to rock the boat. We see people voting, at least in my area, by emotion rather than by visible evidence. Story 17. You cannot solve any problems if you do not win. Win, then solve what you can. Story 18. Absolutely. It has become a sport and everyone wants their team to win. Story 19. When solving problems becomes the most effective way to win an election, politics will change. Throughout history, politics has been more about power than solving problems. Story 20. Around 2016, one party began attracting people who had never cared about politics by using an all-or-nothing sports tactic. They no longer believed that having a voice mattered and sought to win everything in politics at all costs. Unfortunately, there is little bipartisanship in government now. Story 21. Almost all politicians care more about gaining and keeping power than actually helping their constituents. Even my parents, who are borderline supporters of the Make America Great Again movement, admit this. Local politicians, including those on the city council, are often in it for control and power first and foremost. Some might genuinely care, but those are usually the ones who know they are only in the game because people vote for them. A possible law would be to ban all campaigning while opening the ballot to everyone. You might get an ordinary person elected as president, prime minister, or another title, but voters would choose people they know rather than what is pushed on them through advertising. Story 22. I do not think it is restricted to modern ones. Make a list of issues and problems and really think about them. These are things that have been around for decades, or for many of us, a lifetime. I cannot remember an election cycle that did not feature some fear about Social Security being cut. There are fears that groups such as Black people, poor people, or Hispanic people will take something away from good people. It has been the same thing all the time, every time, to the point that most of us do not really expect action. Military spending and the budget, for example, receive zero effort to change ever, and they will not be changed. Story 23. People tend to work toward the measures of success they are given, even at the expense of the measure's true intention or spirit. It is a well-known effect in business. The measure of success for a political party is the number of votes. The intention is that a party with the best ideas and that solves the most problems receives the most votes. In practice, you only need to persuade people to vote for you or to avoid voting for the other candidate and to appear to solve problems. Perversely, even if you have good ideas and solve many problems, the effects are often invisible to voters and you can lose to the other candidate. Story 24. This is not a modern development. I would say we crossed into this territory sometime around the 1870s. Story 25. I think a lot of the time they do not actually care about fixing a problem because you cannot campaign on a problem that is already fixed. Story 26. Most do because staying in power often takes priority over making tough long-term choices that might cost votes. Story 27. They are known to spend most of their time raising re-election campaign funds. Story 28. It depends. National politicians are largely self-interested and will do whatever it takes to stay in power. State politicians are less self-interested but still often motivated by power. Local politicians are less motivated by power. Most try to serve their communities. As community size increases, power becomes a larger factor. Story 29. Winning, control, and money are the most important aspects for many of them. Some people may have entered with good intentions, but then the system took over and they became a cog in the political machine. Story 30. Modern politicians care mostly about grinding the working class into dust so they can make pastries to serve at their fancy parties. Story 31. It appears they are only after the next paycheck. Story 32. Winning elections is a point of pride, gives power, and often leads to personal wealth. You cannot solve problems if you lose elections, so winning comes first. Some Republicans believe big government is the main problem. Their approach is to break it, cut Medicare and food stamps, remove watchdog agencies such as the Federal Trade Commission, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that enables businesses to harm consumers through higher prices, more pollution, and reduced protections. If you truly believe big government is evil, grinding government to a halt and making it work less effectively is a win. Story 33. That is by design, is it not? It is the voters who are supposed to hold politicians accountable. We should offer our vote only if they solve problems, or vote only for politicians who care about more than themselves. If that is not working, perhaps the system needs an update. Story 34. Initially, they want to solve problems. The longer they stay in office, the more it becomes about power. Story 35. One is supposed to feed the other. I think voters are more concerned about preventing certain politicians from winning than asking anyone to do anything. Negative partisanship is a powerful force in today's elections, both toward a party and even more against a party's base. People who vote Republican despise the stereotype of the Democratic base and want to punish that straw man. The reverse is often true as well. I filled out my ballot this morning and voted against a measure because supporters framed it emotionally, refused to answer basic questions, and hoped an emotional appeal would overcome serious reservations about a very expensive program that is already having problems a year into implementation. Dismissing my legitimate concerns as extremism was essentially the entire pitch for a very complex and expensive program reboot. Story 36. They cannot do anything unless they win, so that is most important. Story 37. Solving problems? Who does that? Not politicians. There is your answer as it currently stands. Story 38. In the United States, these are essentially the same. No politician can solve problems unless they are elected. This is a flawed paradigm because those most knowledgeable about solving problems are often not politicians. Voters, conversely, will not reward politicians with office unless they believe their issues will be addressed, creating a cycle in which uninformed politicians fail to improve voters' lives. Many criticize the idea of a technocracy, but experts guiding society can be beneficial when combined with democratic principles. Story 39. Most are only in it for personal success. Some, like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are doing it for the benefit of society as a whole, but they are a tiny minority compared to those motivated by greed and power. Story 40. People want politicians to keep taxes low while still providing social benefits. Because this is often impossible, and raising taxes can lead to losing votes, politicians prefer the popular option. Many issues are complex and require time and money to fix. How many people are willing to spend those resources to do the right thing? Hence our current predicament. Story 41. Because what many people consider problems are, to those funding them, moneymakers. Story 42. The vast majority do. The few who care run into a wall of apathy and red tape when they finally get there, making it nearly impossible to bring about meaningful change. This is true everywhere. Story 43. You work for the politicians now, not the other way around. Story 44. To quote, yes, Minister, not the reputable ones. But there aren't many of those. There will always be people who want to be the change they wish to see. Politics is a playing field of power, so it naturally attracts people who seek to advance themselves, and creating laws becomes a means to an end. Story 45. You are approaching the question from the wrong angle. Politicians care primarily about being elected. If you want your problem solved, form a group that helps them win. Get out the vote, distribute leaflets, and make phone calls. Once you are a reliable part of the electorate that supports them, you can start asking for policy changes. It does not matter whether the politician personally believes in solving the problem if you can incentivize them to act. You will spend far less energy worrying about the unknowable question of what is going on in their head. Story 46. They care about money and power. Winning elections keeps them within reach of both. Story 47. I do not think politicians are a homogeneous group. While some are clearly in the game for themselves, worldwide there are quite a few people who enter politics because they want to be part of the solution and build a better world. Story 48. Winning elections is all they care about. Politicians cause problems, not solve them. Story 49. I think it is obvious they do not know how to solve problems. Politicians are not giving the people what they need or want. Story 50. I think they have to. Since Citizens United, almost everyone in Washington has been too busy trying to keep their jobs instead of doing their duties. You cannot be in the room where it happens without a large campaign fund, and we ordinary people simply cannot make the kind of contributions that grease those wheels. Story 51. They care most about how much money they can make while in office and will lie to voters to get elected. Story 52. If unlimited money is legalized in campaign financing, elections stop being about what the public wants and become about what financiers want. Story 53. I read a book about Watergate in the 1970s. There is a quote from a politician. A politician's only concern is what will get them reelected. I commend the Republicans in the Senate who voted to convict Trump, as they knew it would seriously hurt their chances. Story 54. There is more to win than anything else. We live in a time when the ladder is being pulled up by the more fortunate, creating a larger relative number of less fortunate. This means a position of influence or prestige is more desirable than ever. As a result, a job in politics becomes less about serving or giving back to the community and more about surviving comfortably, regardless of party affiliation. Story 55. It is all about incentives. People act according to incentives. They are not motivated to help but to survive. That is why we need term limits, campaign finance reform, and many other changes to incentives. For that to happen, the political pendulum must swing far. The good thing is it has swung very far in the opposite direction, which may help when it swings back. Story 56. It is the former because the speaker gestures wildly in all directions. Story 57. I think many people view politics as a stepping stone to acquire wealth and influence. Some pursue a position in politics. Others throw their hat in the ring without intending to win, because that would run counter to their main goal of making money. It's a big club and you aren't in it, George Carlin. Story 58. They care only about winning because it lets them obtain more money by taking bribes disguised as campaign contributions. Story 59. Winning elections allows politicians to sell their votes to people who finance their campaigns and give them kickbacks. Repeating this cycle can make them wealthy while requiring significant effort only every few years. Story 60. Of course, being a politician has always been a way to amass power and wealth. It is up to us to fix the systems that create this perverse incentive. Until we do, it will always exist. Story 61. There is a great line from the movie The American President, released 30 years ago. I was so busy keeping my job, I forgot to do my job. Well, that ends right now. It is a movie, an idealized version of what a politician should do or say. In the real world, no politician is willing to risk losing their job to do the right thing, so the right thing often does not get done. Implementing term limits for the United States Congress would help solve this problem, but because Congress would vote on such a change, it is unlikely to happen. Story 62. Yes, because their job as politicians is primarily to win. Solving problems might help them win the next election cycle. In that case, they will work to solve those problems. Or solving a problem might hurt their chances of winning, and then they will work to ensure the problem is not solved or is made worse. Take a current hot-button issue, immigration, and consider the incentive structure for solving it. Are the Republicans currently in charge actually doing anything to solve this issue? Not really. They are haphazardly rounding people up and deporting them while making a show of increasing border staffing. However, they have not passed legislation that implements long-term solutions. One could argue they have made the problem worse because immigrants, legal and undocumented, will be less trusting of federal programs that collect information, and this is causing headaches for courts across the country. But solving the problem is not the goal. Republicans, like Democrats, know we need immigration to support the economy amid declining birth rates and an aging population. The real goal is to create a bogeyman and show the base they are eliminating it, even if the performance is divorced from reality. The performance is what matters, not the facts. That performance is creating many more problems that are far more significant than illegal immigration ever was, but that is secondary to putting on the show their political strategists recommend. Story 63. Lately, the ones in the United States seem to be acting like they won't ever have to worry about re-election. Story 64. Yes, that's the main downside of democracy. Voters are often not the most informed. Story 65. I think you have a bias toward the United States. Even where corruption looks different elsewhere, it is not the same system or effort around re-election. In many other countries, doing some of the disastrous things that United States politicians have been doing recently and more frequently would get them physically removed from office. Remember the explosion in Beirut in 2020? An entire city council resigned. Governor Rick Snyder remained in power after it became obvious in 2014 and 2015 that he decided who should intentionally get clean water, such as the Nestle Corporation, and who should not, namely the people of Flint. He abused the process by declaring an emergency to override city policymakers and remained governor until 2018. Society is not civilized when criminals stay in power for years while the public figures out whether they committed major wrongdoing and what they intended. Any decent public official knows that if something that serious happens, it is time to step down because at minimum it was a grave mistake. If you remain defiant, the crowd may turn on you. Story 66. If they keep getting elected, they retain their wealth and power, which explains why career politicians are all multimillionaires. If they solve problems, they would have nothing to campaign on. Their solutions create more problems, requiring a larger bureaucracy to address them, which in turn requires more money. They then funnel that money through non-governmental organizations and back to themselves. Story 67. Let's say Cuomo was their enemy. They would go nuts that he killed 11,000 people in nursing homes, like Trump tweeted. But when he runs against a candidate they dislike because he is labeled a socialist, suddenly the claim that he killed 11,000 seniors by putting people sick with coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 into nursing homes on purpose is not a big deal and he becomes their candidate. That answers you. Story 68. Yes, because it's about influence and enrichment nowadays. Story 69. For the majority of establishment politicians, is it not obvious? Story 70. Modern politicians mostly care about power and influence. Story 71. Look at Bernie. He has been in Congress for over 30 years and has 0 bills to his name. Anytime he can bash Democrats to drum up donations for his 3rd vacation home, he is all for it. Story 72. Even the rare politician who genuinely cares about their constituents has to put winning re-election first. If they are not re-elected, they not only lose the power to advance policies that help their constituents, but the person who replaces them will probably work to undo any progress they made. Story 73. They care about getting elected because solving problems is not a guaranteed way to be re-elected. Story 74. Why do people always think these kinds of behaviors are new? Politicians have always been a mix of power-hungry and altruistic figures vying for positions of influence. Sometimes they are a bit of both. I have been watching a lot of docuseries on cults lately, and you can clearly see that leaders pretend to be altruistic but are really chasing power. Occasionally you get the sense they have indulged in their own rhetoric long enough to partly believe some of their narratives. Story 75. For the United States House of Representatives, a 2-year term is idiotic. All they do is campaign, make it a 4-year term and send them home forever. Story 76. Yes, it is obvious. What explains this? What is best for constituents is not always best for the campaign contributors and lobbyists who pay the bills. Campaign side hustles, book sales, keynote speaking, $10,000 per plate fundraising dinners, and secret favors from lobbyists often generate more income than elected salaries. Selling the sizzle rather than the steak still works. Many voters support whoever makes the most appealing promises, regardless of track record, feasibility, ethics, or legality. Politicians can distract the public with manufactured issues, keep the news focused on a crisis, stir the base, frame the issue as an existential threat, and voters will reward you with votes. Most controversies blow over long before the next election, so the same tactic can be used repeatedly. Party affiliation also matters. With the right party label, a core of voters can be taken for granted. They may continue to vote for a candidate despite poor treatment, especially if blame can be shifted for failures. To secure a party nomination, candidates must show they are effective fundraisers and have a message that resonates with the public. The old boys network still exists in established parties. Elections often go to the party that spends the most. Deep pockets win. The result is predictable. Pander to the base, fulfill only a fraction of promises, shift blame for failures, and latch onto whatever issue is trending with key demographics. Do that, and you can ride the gravy train for decades. Story 77. They care about solving problems, but addressing civic issues for their constituents matters only to the extent that it helps them get elected. Story 78. Absolutely yes. They care more about keeping their ultra-cushy jobs with numerous staff and perks. Story 79. The problems help them divide us. There is no way they have any interest in fixing them. Story 80. I do not see how anyone can honestly believe that. Story 81. They are solving problems but not for the average person. However, more people are interested in winning arguments than in solving problems. Story 82. The sad reality is that, in order to win, politicians need big money to pay for expensive advertising. As a result, our government has become a wholly owned subsidiary of corporations and the wealthy. There are some genuinely good people in office, trying to serve the public, but they are the exception, especially at the federal level. That is why policies that are very popular, like Medicare for all, have almost no chance of being enacted, because they cut into the profit margins of the oligarchs. Story 83. I strongly recommend that you watch House of Cards because a character like Peter Russo completely captures what happens to well-intentioned politicians. Story 84. A less pessimistic view is that campaigns are now perpetual. You win? Good for you. Now you start campaigning and doing things mostly to win the next election. There is no time to govern because you are always judged for your actions. If you are always thinking about the next election, you cannot make tough choices because people will not like the medicine. Story 85. I just launched a campaign for a local office. In talking with state and local politicians, what they describe is an established network of businesses, including pollsters, lobbyists, marketers, and others, working to maintain the system and their connections. Higher-level politicians raise and spend millions for their campaigns and support. Repeal Citizens United. Establish public campaign financing. Remove money from politics. Story 86. How much money can a politician make by winning an election compared to solving a problem? Story 87. Oh, they absolutely do not care about winning elections. They are the most selfless and hardworking people in the world. I cannot think of a more competent group except for the original poster, who posts remarkably deep and philosophical questions that invite debate on both sides. Just like the original poster, politicians have absolutely no ulterior motives. This statement is sarcastic. Story 88. Jesus Christ, I do not have the energy for a thread like this right now. Story 89. Yes and no. You cannot solve problems if you do not win elections, and if you believe you have the best solutions to the problems you care about, it is paramount to put yourself in a position to fix them. The two are interconnected in ways most people do not consider. There are far more politicians than you might imagine. 519,682 elected officials in the United States. Most are regular people trying to do what they think is best for their constituents. I have worked for several elected officials and closely with dozens of others. I will answer through the lens of how those officials approach this issue. My first boss on Capitol Hill hated the politicking side of things. Fundraising was his least favorite activity. He wanted to improve life for people in his district. Many members focus first on constituent service or legislation. He was a first-term member and never really got his feet under him before he lost his first re-election bid. But there were a few things he did that made me proud to work for him. My second boss was a state delegate who worked full-time as a doctor. He outworked every other candidate to win his seat and personally knocked on every door in his district. He had a million ideas, and in our legislature there was no upper limit on the number of bills one could introduce, so he introduced all his ideas. 25 bills in my first session working for him and around 18 the next session. We worked tirelessly to get as many bills through as we could, with our sole focus on improving the lives of people in our state. But he never lost sight of the importance of staying in office, so he continued to grind on his elections. He is genuinely one of the best people I know. My last boss before I stopped working for elected officials to make some money for myself was somewhere in between. He is absolutely focused on winning his elections and is willing to occasionally adopt a more popular position, but I have also seen him wrestle with the right approach on issues that are not his main priorities. On the issues he cares about most, he is uncompromising. He does everything he can to achieve the most complete outcome possible, and many of his preferred policies are consistent across multiple issue areas. He views things through a couple of lenses and focuses a great deal on equity concerns. I have also seen him dig into complex issues and anger both sides by charting his own course and supporting what he believes is best. Most elected officials are regular people, especially at the state and local level. There are some terrible ones who are only in it for themselves at all levels of government, but they are, in my experience, a minority, although they are more prevalent on Capitol Hill than elsewhere. Story 90. Sort of. There is an entire party dedicated to helping the poor and underserved. They just do not win elections. Story 91. It is financially beneficial for most. The United States government is shut down. What do you think most representatives are doing right now? Story 92. Some are doing a great job and some are essentially mob bosses. It is lazy to generalize and say they are all the same. Story 93. I think some politicians start out wanting to solve problems, but after entering politics they learn that special interests control everything and that they must play the game. They find money very tempting and lose sight of their purpose. Story 94. Look around you. What do you think it looks like in response to your question? Are enough things getting done for individual Americans to show politicians really care about solving problems? Why do police still shoot mere suspects? Why are inflation and prices still rising? Why are our veterans' benefits being cut instead of expanded? Why are companies not required to justify their hiring decisions when they contribute to our unemployment crisis? Why would you even ask this question? What do you need to understand? Story 95. There has always been a mix of idealists and self-interested people seeking power, influence, and money. I think the recent fascist wave has purged most idealists, and we are now left with power-hungry authoritarians dismantling the checks and balances established to keep them at bay. Story 96. Yes, so they can keep their comfortable lifestyle and feel important at the same time. Story 97. If winning elections were the ultimate source of power, Democrats would not cede them so easily. It is more complicated than that, but everyone who studies it loses enough sanity that they should not be trusted. Story 98. You have identified a key problem with the concept of democracy. You can have great ideas about solving problems, but it does not matter if you cannot win an election. In that sense, winning is the most important factor. Since ancient times, people have asked whether the person best suited to winning an election is also the person best suited to governing. Does democracy choose the best person to lead or the best person to run in an election? This is not a pro-fascist post. It is intended to point out ways in which democratic systems can be fragile. Story 99. Rather than place all the blame on politicians, I think a question worth asking is how they are getting away with this. Do you think voters care whether politicians solve problems? If so, why do the politicians who fail to deliver solutions not get voted out? Story 100. Yes, because all they want to do now is get their way and leave the people with no say. Story 101. Unequivocally, yes. If they win, they are in for at least a few years. They can and do say whatever they need to get elected. After that, all bets are off. Just look at the White House for an example. Story 102. This question is worded to be obvious, but some get into it for the right reasons. Then they find they need to raise funds to make anything happen, or they become disillusioned and come to see it as a job. Story 103. In the 2010 Supreme Court decision Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, wealthy donors such as Elon Musk and foreign governments, through organizations such as the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, gained greater ability to influence politicians. Politicians often care less about serving voters than about pleasing their donors. Donor money and think tanks shape public opinion. The more money they receive, the more influence they have. Money has become the lifeblood of politics, replacing attention to the nation's needs and national security. Story 104. Yes, it's a pipe dream, but term limits would go a long way toward fixing the structural issues we have. Open primaries and ranked choice voting would help as well. Story 105. Such cases are extremely rare. Bernie Sanders cares more about solving problems than about winning elections, as an obvious example. Story 106. What is there to think? Almost every United States politician has proven it. Story 107. The current United States Congress is not in session to prevent a vote that would expose the party leader's numerous crimes that the leader has tried to cover up. This action shows that these elected officials care only about their leader and themselves. Story 108. Do you care more about serving hungry people at McDonald's or collecting your paycheck? Story 109. With few exceptions, mostly at the local level, politicians are primarily interested in keeping their jobs. Thanks to political science degrees and government internships, being a politician has become a career rather than a civil duty performed to improve constituents' lives. Unfortunately, people like Donald Trump have made running for national office no better than running for high school president. where candidates promise what voters want to hear without the knowledge or intent to actually do it. The few with noble intentions usually either leave after accomplishing their meager goals or fail to be re-elected because they achieved little or nothing. Story 110. When Jon Stewart was hosting The Daily Show, they interviewed a congressional staffer who said a politician's job is to get re-elected. That was about 10 to 15 years ago, and I doubt things have improved since. Story 111. The American government should be thinking long-term, such as building infrastructure or going to Mars, which are massive projects that states alone cannot do. All American politicians think about is the next election. Story 112. Regarding winning and donations, only a small minority actually care about their community and constituents. Usually only very young Democrats and true independents care. Most Democrats and Republicans and those fake independent offshoots of Republicans do not care. Story 113. Yes, they have to because of the impact of campaigning and outside money on elections. Story 114. I would hope so, because winning an election is a prerequisite for solving problems in government. It doesn't matter how good your ideas are if you can't get elected to a position that gives you the authority to use them. Story 115. Yes. Even if you are a politician who cares about making a difference, you need to be re-elected to continue that work, and campaigns take up most of your term. Story 116. Yes. Lobbyist checks. They do not care about the people they are supposed to represent. Story 117. Yes. Why? Because when you watch their actions, they only care about winning elections. When you hear their speeches, they appear to be the most noble people who have ever lived. These things do not match. Story 118. Absolutely. Evidence. I don't care what it was. What's the last problem a politician completely solved? Now, what was the last problem a politician completely caused? Which question took you longer to answer? Story 119. Yes, because of the absurd amount of money they generate while in office. Story 120. Yes. There is so much money and so many benefits in being a politician. A non-stop gravy train. Their voting records and whether they endorse a candidate or refuse to do so will tell you, directly or indirectly, whom they really represent. Follow the money. For example, every Democrat who has refused to endorse Mamdani, with the possible exception of Barack Obama, has taken money from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Story 121. Laughing out loud. That has always been their goal. They only care about re-election to keep the gravy train running. Story 122. Politicians have always cared only about winning elections. It is the voters' responsibility to hold them accountable for failing to solve problems, and we are not doing that as well as we should. Story 123. Social Security is approaching insolvency. Who is doing anything about it? Story 124. In the case of Trump, yes. He is focused on easy wins. His style of governing is erratic, so it is difficult to address complex problems. In general, no. It is difficult to get everyone to agree on solutions or even on what the real problems are. Story 125. I think Republicans do. Democrats still seem to want to run a working government. Story 126. By design, officials care more about winning elections than solving problems. In theory, the system requires them to solve problems if they are elected. When that does not happen, it indicates a system failure and the system must be changed or adjusted. Story 127. Absolutely. They care nothing about us. They are only getting richer and gaining power. Story 128. Yes, it is a career. Without the office, these people do not have jobs. Story 129. I wonder when politicians last cared more about solving problems than about winning elections. Story 130. Yes, for the most part, but this is not a modern phenomenon. It has been happening since ancient times. Democracy has changed the form somewhat and opened more offices to this problem, but the problem itself is far from new. Story 131. Absolutely. It's simple. If they win and gain exposure, people will listen to them, especially in the case of American presidents. They are capitalizing on the fact that most American citizens do not realize that being president does not make someone the best person to run the country. Story 132. Most are just in it for the power and to line their pockets. Democrats and Republicans. Story 133. Oh, for sure. Most of them seem to care only about their own fame and wealth. I have seen it many times. But who cares since they are not legally responsible for anything? It is all a theater. Story 134. It is the nature of politicians in a democracy to worry mostly about winning elections. This has been true since comedians first began satirizing elections and politicians some 2,500 years ago and likely earlier. It is the responsibility of the people who elect them to give clear instructions and hold them to account. You cannot stop a politician from constantly testing the wind, but you can change which way the wind blows. Story 135. I know this is a bot question, but seriously, this is a new low level of stupidity. Story 136. To be a politician by the formal definition, one must first win an election. Story 137. Republicans, probably. I am not convinced that Democrats want to win or solve problems. Story 138. Yes, of course. Why? Because many of these long-serving figures have remained in power for decades. For example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg refused to step down and allow President Barack Obama to appoint a successor, choosing to remain until her death. That decision enabled President Donald Trump to select a replacement, and the effects are evident today. Story 139. You cannot paint all politicians with the same brush. Some are overly focused on winning and are actively working to ruin the entire country. There are also many good politicians who work hard for their constituents, follow the law, and try to make the country better. If you do not know which is which, pay more attention to what is going on. Try watching different news programs because they are not all the same. Story 140. Republicans want to make sure we never have another election. Democrats are too busy sabotaging themselves to care. I would say no. No one cares about winning, and no problems are being solved. Story 141. How do you solve problems if you cannot get elected? This is a dishonest, inflammatory question. Story 142. The flood of politics is not really a flood right now, it is a circus. People are entertained by circuses. Eventually a certain orange clown will be out of power and will stop making outrageous rhetoric, and the overall temperature will drop. Political news will return to being largely boring, and we will again hear only major developments rather than ramblings. Story 143. I only see that on the right. Everyone on the left is focused entirely on solving problems. This is why the right wins. You cannot solve problems unless you win elections. The right has learned that when they do not care about solving problems, they can pursue power grabs and act without regard for people, which frees up time. The left, by contrast, cares and is held to higher standards. Even a suggestion that voters should elect them to solve problems provokes accusations that they only want power. Yet no one says that about the Republican Party. Story 144. A politician who does not care about winning elections, or who refuses to spend the time, effort, and money required to win them, does not remain a politician for long. Story 145. Republicans, for sure. Democrats do solve problems, depending on which news source you get your information from. Republicans are notorious for ripping apart and shredding good, solid solutions that have been working. Then they mess up, as they always do, and Democrats get back into office and have to straighten it all out. This has been going on for years. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.